I'll stand in the middle. When you do this in your classroom, you do chairs. And you have to come closer. You do chairs, but you have one fewer chair than people. So if there's 10 people, now just 10 people, you would have 9 chairs. And the 10th person stands in the middle and says, I love my friends who, and you say friends, or I like my friends, depending on who you're working with, who are wearing glasses. And the people who are wearing glasses stand up and they have to switch places. So you, okay, and then sit down. But the person asking the questions does too. Even so, I love all the people who are wearing glasses, even though I'm wearing glasses or not, I would still move. Whoever's left, ask the next question. Kids don't like being in the center, right? So they're gonna say, I love my neighbors who are wearing pants, right? And to hurry up and get a seat. And the rule is, and it's fun for kids, you can't go side to side. So if you and I, we're going to stand up because we have the same trait, you can't just do this and sit. You have to move, okay? And it becomes fun, a little dangerous, depending on how many people are in the room, so make sure you have the space. Anyway, what we're going to do right now is just a quick, I love my friends who came to this session. I'll be asking all the questions. You're just going to move so I can get an idea of who you are. All right? So I love all my friends who are first-timers to NSTA conferences. Awesome. Awesome. I love all my neighbors who are first-year teachers. I love all my neighbors who have been teaching for the first 5 years of their career. I love all my neighbors. It's okay. That happens in class, trust me. I love all my neighbors who teach science. Notice there's one person not moving. Why is that person here? Just kidding. Oh, no. I love all my neighbors who have used a novel, a book, other than a textbook, a book written for fun in their classroom. I love my neighbors who have kids in their classrooms who say, this is science, not English. Why do we have to read? Sorry. I like your kids already if they're not saying that. Okay. And I love all my neighbors who have read the zombie autopsies. All right. This is Dr. Stephen Schlossman. He's the author of the zombie autopsies. They've never read. All right. You guys can have a seat and we'll begin. Easy game? Oh, good icebreaker? Okay. You're welcome. And you can do that for all sorts of different activities. Nice to see you. Okay, a couple of things. When I registered for this session to become a presenter, I registered under the strand Literacy in Science, which I think is super important because not everybody is literate in a content area, and kids think a lot of the time that literacy is being able to read, and that's it. And in science, it's more than just being able to read. It's reading for information. It is sometimes a different type of writing style than a novel for the creative thinkers. And what I have found by using this book in my classroom is I'm able to reach the masses. So a lot of times in our teacher prep courses, we're taught we need to reach the middle. We need to at least reach the middle. And I have been successful in reaching the masses through this book. And I'll talk about the pedagogy in just a moment. I am Nicole Snook. I am from Changemaker High School in Tucson, Arizona, and you have met Dr. Stephen, and he will be speaking as well just on some of the talking points. This is the book right here. I brought my copy only because I wanted him to sign it. This is the first time we're meeting in person, and it has all my notes and highlighted. I've read it many times. It never comes back the same as it did at the beginning of the unit, because I always find something new or I never thought of, or a kid says something or asks a question that maybe I wasn't, and I mark that because I might be able to use it later on in that class or the next year. Also, when I come to a conference like this, I ask some of you, well, I didn't ask you if this is your first conference. Can you raise your hand if this is your first science conference? Again, okay. So one of the things that I find valuable about attending conferences, and one thing I do on evaluating sessions and conferences in general when I go, is can I use this in my classroom on Monday? Or can I use this in my classroom the next quarter? Because obviously Monday is 2 days from now. You would have to read this book. You would have to think about your kids. It may not fit into your scope and sequence, but you can use it in August, okay? So I promise you, you will be able to use this in the different ways that I show you in your classroom very soon. And that is a plus for me as a science teacher, because I want tools, and I want them fast, right? The name of my high school is Changemaker High School, and we have different pillars that we focus on. We are in Tucson, Arizona, and change making is all about starting empathy, teamwork, and problem solving. And we have themed our quarters based on those changemaker competencies is what we call them. And the fourth quarter, which we are entering soon, is the community involvement piece. This book, The Zombie Autopsies, I use in the first quarter when we are teaching starting empathy, because we have to explicitly teach empathy to ninth graders. The world revolves around them. Am I right?
Yeah.
They don't think about anything else. They don't even think about the person sitting next to them sometimes. And so we have to explicitly teach this, and it can be covertly taught through this book. Because you start talking about feelings and imagining, like, what if the world did turn like this? What if Tucson, I use Tucson as our example, was suddenly gone because somebody blew up the Air Force base that was right there? I can use a really real example from where I am. You need to use an example from where you are so that you can help the youth connect and start empathy. If they feel no connection, this isn't my home, why do I care? It's harder to draw them in to those feelings. You will see, if you choose this book, there's a lot of teamwork among the four main characters. And obviously the problem of solving the apocalypse has happened. This is post-apocalyptic, and 1/3 of humanity has died in 2013. And you have to figure out how to stop this. And this is a pop culture topic right now because of shows like the Zombie Autopsies. I grew up with Night of the Living Dead, which scared the crap out of me. And everything in between, including video games that these kids are playing now. There's also, TI has a game where they have a zombie virus, and you play it and code and learn coding to stop the spread of the virus, okay? I'm not into that, but there are kids who are. So please think about that. They will tell you, by the way. They'll say, hey, I played this game. And this is about zombies. They'll find those connections. I want a lot of Q and A, so I, if you have them, want to address that. But before that, just give you the background. I personally teach science through the lens of social justice, and I live in an area of the country where social justice is constantly on our minds. Those of you in education know, hopefully, about the Mexican American Studies ban in Tucson Unified School District. If you don't, it was a class action suit that eventually it started in 2007, and it just got heard in the court last 2017. And they won. But Tucson University Unified School District is trying not to allow Mexican American studies in their school now, even though we can teach it now. So a lot of our students in Tucson are of that descent, or they are part of that culture because they live in Tucson. And so we look at why we can't learn about it in schools. Environmental sustainability is the topic now. Anybody teach environmental sustainability? Okay. And it goes into any area of science. You can, if you want to choose environmental sustainability as your anchor, you can teach biology through that lens. You can teach earth science through that lens. You can teach a general. You can teach chemistry through that lens of environmental sustainability. And this book is the post-apocalyptic. The world has changed severely. How are we going to survive? And it gets kids thinking about that. And again, I use the bomb going off at the Air Force Base by my school as an example. Youth voice, obviously, is super important to me. I try to make decisions in my classroom that include their wants and needs. So when, and this has yet to fail, I say, we're going to read a book this quarter. What do you think I hear? What else?
Why?
What else?
No.
It's hard. This is in English. Drives me nuts. This isn't an English class. Anything else? They may not say this, but what might be in their brain?
Is it boring?
Okay, what else? I can't read well, right? Great. She's going to give me a book, and I can't read well. So the next thing I say is, here's the book, and I pass it out to them. And I usually have to order new ones every year because kids love it so much they want to take it. Okay, whether they buy it or steal it is up to them, but I usually don't have a class set by the time we're done with it, okay? It's a $10 book, it's no big deal. And I say, just look at it. And the very first thing they notice is the cover. It's torn, there's blood, there's a scalpel, there's a brain, it's about autopsies. What? Side note, I'm an autopsy expert. I don't expect that everybody who is teaching this book is, but I did pathology for 10 years, and I did autopsies. So that connection for me, and being able to give that to my students, is a unique lens that not everybody has. Okay, so please know that about me, and so my kids are they're able to critique the process that you put in here to make sure that it's right. And we also do dissection so they can see what it's like. And I tell them to flip through it. I don't know if you can see. What do you notice? Different colors? You see that? Okay, I'll make it over here. See different colors? So if you're a kid, what are you thinking? Pictures. What else? Anything else? Are you thinking you want to open it yet? So I tell them to. And I say, just go like this. Oh, wait, before that. Just a side note. When I was a kid and my mom would take me to the library, I would open a book, I would judge it by its cover, and I would look at the size of the words, the size of the letters, the font, and I'd pick the biggest font because I wanted to get through that book. I had a reading difficulty, so I know what it's like, but I didn't know I had a reading difficulty then. This book, and I tell the kids, they notice right away, I'll go this way, what do you notice about the gray page in front of you? It's in italics. What else does it look like? A journal. You see that? It kind of looks like a journal. Okay. And I'm sorry I only brought one copy, but I have to limit what I can carry right now. See the words? And it looks like a journal. And that's because it is. It's a diary. Okay? Told in first person. And then interspersed between the gray journal is regular font, where the CDC, the role of the CDC, is talking to us. We are people and scientists. I assign the role to them. They're medical students, and they have to come up with a cure for this. So when the CDC parts come in, it's basically the CDC talking to us, okay? And we are tasked with finding a solution to this problem. And I'll leave this here for later. Any questions yet? I'm gonna get into like how to do this, but if anybody has any questions, I wanna pause. Oh, whoops. The community involvement. So that is very important to me in my teaching. So it's not just about the students learning science, it's what can you do with that knowledge, okay? So even if it's weeding and getting invasive species out so natural native species can grow and thrive, there's that community involvement. They can start with weeding. I used to hate weeding. I understand it now. I hated it as a child when my parents would make me go out to do it, but I understand it as an adult now. And I can say to my students now why it's important to weed, for example. Of course, you're at a science conference, you need to know that this book, if you have to do curriculum development or turn in a lesson plan, I haven't created those officially, but just know you can. So if your district or your school requires you to do that, you can tie it into NGSS, the science standards for your state, and also, if there are the cross-cutting ideas come into math and ELA, which you will see on the handout, I have done this as a thematic unit, cross-disciplinary. So the kids are using the book as an anchor text and walking into math class thinking about how does this book relate to math, for example, English, for example. Highly replicable, I want all of you, that's my dream, to do this. As far as Dr. Stephen knows, if something's not happening, let me know. As far as Dr. Stephen knows, I'm the only one who is using his book in the classroom. Do you know any others in the K-12?
Since you and I have spoken, yeah, it's funny, it just comes to me kind of organically, like folks will drop me email. It's actually the students write me email.
Right.
More often, and they'll say, have you read this article from the Journal of Infectious Disease? And I'll say, no, I'm a psychiatrist, but tell me about it. And they do, and it's really cool. It's awesome. But you were the trailblazer.
First one, the trailblazer, and that was in 2016. Okay, I think. And we'll get to that. So this can be reproduced. You don't have to get in touch with the author. That was the next step that I told my students. Actually came up with the idea of getting in touch with him, and I said, go for it. See what happens. All right. The next thing that every teacher or every young person is like, why do I have to know this, right? Why are we reading about the brain? Well, I choose to do this with 9th graders, and you will see that 9th graders need brain science to understand why they are the way they are. It'll also help you as a teacher to understand why your students are the way they are. You can just keep telling yourself, you just don't have a frontal lobe. That frontal lobe is not developed, and just silently say that as your mantra. You may notice that I'm not talking correctly or moving correctly or normally. And that is because I suffered more than two strokes that you will see. And they happened serendipitously while I was teaching the zombie classes. So the first stroke occurred in 2014. And I had, during the first quarter, and the beginning of the second quarter, and I suffered an occipital lobe ischemic stroke. And this is an MRI. And this is what I looked like in the emergency room. And So you'll notice the facial droop and the twitching, okay? And this is another view of the MRI to show this was in the occipital lobe, and it's on the actually left because you see it's like I'm facing you this way. So it's the left side of my brain that in the back in the occipital lobe that got messed up. Well, by the time this happened, my students were starting to learn the parts of brain in their brain science unit. We'll get to that in just a moment. Most recently, in December, I suffered a cerebellar stroke. And the cerebellum is another part of your brain that controls your movement and your coordination and your strength, voluntary movements, balance, things like that. And I was in the middle of the zombie autopsy, at the end, sorry, I was at the end of the zombie autopsies when this happened, and I literally was having the symptoms of one of the stages of the zombie autopsy. So unfortunately, because of what happened to me, my students had a real life application of this. But there are people that, and scans, and the internet is a wonderful thing, that can share stories about their brain injury. I'm sure your students can know. By the way, today is International and National Brain Injury Day, which I didn't know about. Did you? Come on, nerd. All right, so I just found out. This is, again, another slice, right cerebellum. That white spot isn't supposed to be there. That's where the blood didn't go, and that part of my brain was damaged. And so the brain, and you can see the old infarct right here. So what was interesting to see how this stayed with my students was the 9th graders who read this book last year were able to talk about it this year with this stroke. And something that they realized was that, hey, wait a second, she's weak on the right. This happened on the right. The previous stroke happened on the left, but affects her right. And they were able to deduce that the cerebellum controls the right side of the body. Point to note, I didn't even know that. I thought what I learned in school was the left controls the right, and the right controls the left, and that's how I've lived my life. So even students were able to note that. Again, I used the 9th grade integrated science. It's a general science course. This book is of high interest, varied readability. I wouldn't say it's low level readability, it's varied. Depends on what you know. But the pop culture of zombieism is huge right now. And so this is great. I was able to use this in a regular classroom with a push-in model for SPED. So the SPED kids are sitting next to the non-SPED kids. And ELLs are in the same class. And I use the what have we learned, so what does this have to do with science in 9th grade, your life, and now what model. As far as the school goes, we were able to create themed quarters. So our quarters are divided into empathy, teamwork, problem solving, leadership, and this starts in the empathy quarter, but it does show teamwork and problem solving. Are there any questions about this before I let Dr. Schlotzman talk and about the pedagogical approach, because I would like to show you the final project piece after, what the kids had to do. Has anybody in here had a brain injury? Or know somebody who has other than me? Yes? Okay. Alzheimer's? Okay. People who have used drugs? Okay. Alcoholism or alcohol use? Okay. Car accident or trauma to the body of some kind, like a concussion? Okay. So when I say brain injury, I don't necessarily mean that the person had a stroke. It can be a congenital birth defect. You can bring in stuff on the science content, which I'll bring up, about different viruses and bacteria that affect the brain. And I'll bring that up after Dr. Schlossman talks. I wanted to tell him to talk about why he wrote this and the reactions to finding out it was actually being used in a K-12 setting, because I don't think that was his intent. So, Dr. Stephen.
Not conscious. Hey, guys. So I'll be real quick because this is Nicole Stone. She's done all the work, really. So I'm a child psychiatrist. I'm based at Harvard. I grew up in Kansas, so it might surprise you to know that Harvard's a bit of a stodgy place. And they weren't altogether delighted with my writing this book at first. But actually, because of folks like Nicole, they now like to take credit for its pedagogic prowess, which is also in keeping with academia. So this book, I tell folks I want to be a writer since I was 7 and a doctor since I was 26. My dad made me. I like doing both an awful lot. This is one of a few novels I've written, but it's got the most notoriety. The inspiration, though, it was sort of twofold. One is based in nostalgia, and one is based on kind of a sad story that became happy. The nostalgia is I love horror films. I actually teach an undergraduate course on horror films at Harvard, and it's a delight and sort of a dream to do that, and also to see Nicole talk about this stuff. And I love zombies, especially because of the way they serve as metaphors for the ways we can screw up as a species. Because if you think about it, you only have to walk slightly faster than a zombie to get away. You can eat a sandwich while you're getting away. And yet they don't. People turn and shoot. And so you got to ask yourself, like, why? Why, if all you got to do is walk over there, would you turn and blow its head off? And to me, that sort of is a much easier way to discuss these really high-level and difficult concepts, especially in today's day and age, and asking them directly. And I think I realized that intuitively when I was little and snuck into Dawn of the Dead and was subsequently grounded for doing that. I told my parents I was going to see The Jerk. Then what happened is in 2011, my wife got breast cancer. She's totally fine now, thank God. But at the time, I was just scared and couldn't sleep. So I got my kids to sleep. My kids are now 18 and 12, but they were younger then. And I went downstairs. Night of the Living Dead was on TV. It's always on TV because it's an eminent domain movie. I don't know if you guys know that. When Romero made it, he didn't copyright it. He was the chief cameraman for Mr. Rogers, and he didn't know he'd be a filmmaker. So he made this movie for $10,000 of his own money and his buddies, but they forgot to put a copyright on it, so it never made a penny for him. But it launched his career. So it was on. I thought, I can't make my life better. I can make these zombies better. So I'm going to sit down and write a fake medical paper and put it on Reddit about what ails a zombie. What's wrong with their brain? Why are they hungry? Well, the ventral medial hypothalamus is messed up, and that's why their appetite suppressing networks aren't getting signals from the colon. Why can't they walk? Because their cerebellum or their basal ganglia are messed up. Why can't they think? They don't have much of a frontal lobe. Why are they so full of rage? Because the amygdala is, overactive. And in the book, it's larger, which makes no sense. It doesn't have to be larger to be more active, but that made it easier to sort of conceptualize. And then a publisher called and said, would you write a book on this? And I said, sure. And because I'm in academics, I said I would do it for free. And then a friend of mine called me and said, they're a for-profit company, so it's okay for you to ask for money from them. And then I got an agent and published this novel. Finding out, it's meant to be a mystery story. It's a little bit of dark humor, but it's a bleak picture, tongue deeply in cheek with a protagonist who is himself infected. The conceit is there's an island, a real island called Basada, India, which is in between Madagascar and the mainland, which the UN chooses as to place its lab. Everyone's infected on the whole planet. Nobody knows where this bug comes from, although it looks like it's evil hedge fund managers who created it and could bet on the market falling. They ship you in to this island, and the scientists dissect living people, although they're considered dead by the UN rules, which also allows you to talk about some of the ethical issues around how we define life and death. And then when you succumb to the disease, you're put into the holding pen, and the next group of scientists come in, and they dissect you. So it's this play on the word autopsy, since they're clearly not dead. They still have a beating heart and breathing lungs. This book I just wrote for kicks. It was really fun, and then suddenly, people like Nicole and others, the National Academy of Sciences, the Texas Instruments, curriculum in the United Kingdom. I mean, it just keeps going. Australia, folks have taken it and used it to teach everything from neuroscience to community involvement to environmental science, and to also explain behavior within the classroom, things like empathy, how we understand the absence of frontal lobe function in adolescents especially, and how we can help them to understand it, actually without insulting them. It's a lot easier to say zombies have a problem with this than to say you have a problem with this. And they weirdly don't seem to mind being called zombies. You can sort of roll with that. So that's really where it's gone. It's twice been optioned. It's not yet been made into a movie. It was optioned, ironically, by George Romero. He and I wrote the screenplay together. So the guy who got me grounded for a movie he made, Dawn of the Dead, when I was 11, 30-something years later, called me and said, hey, can I make this into a movie? I'm like, kid, it'd be awesome. And then, ironically, George really loves musicals and Westerns. George passed away this summer, and he and I were really close. He was a very important mentor to me. And so every time we got together, we would write horror stuff, but then we would go see Shakespeare or watch like Red River or The Quiet Man, one of his favorite movies. So I'm sure if George were alive today, he would adore this. George also was of Latino descent, so he would especially adore the sort of change makers. And George was a die-hard left-of-center guy, as I happen to be as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Stephen.
Sure.
Technology issues. Any questions, comments yet? Just curious, like, what are you? Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, there's even one school of like third, fourth graders. I warned families that the F-bomb gets dropped.
One time. It's one time.
And the brain is blown up all over somebody. It seems like the thing you would say. You wouldn't say darn it. So you just warn folks, and it's also, gosh, compared to what you see in the news, it's just an awful thing to say.
And the F-bomb, when I read it out loud at that point in time, the kids laugh. Because it is, like, you forget there are no bad words. Yes?
Have you tried using other novels, like using these approaches with like other novels as well?
Yes. So, for environmental science, the anchor text I use is the Lorax. For responsibility in science and ethics in science, I use Frankenstein. For social justice issues, along with biology and medical ethics, I use The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. For longitude and latitude and knowing where we are on the planet, I use the book Longitude by Dava Sobel. Longitude by Dava Sobel. And it is also a social justice book because the guy who figured out the longitude problem was a poor, uneducated clockmaker. And he did not get the prize because of a higher person who stole his ideas, a higher person in society. And so there's a socioeconomic, educational, social justice issue there. And he was awarded the prize posthumously. However, it was money, and he was dead. And so, I mean, whatever. So the kids, I use, my bookshelf has the zombie autopsies, Longitude, Frankenstein. Oh, and for cell biology and cancer, and so at medical ethics, I use My Sister's Keeper by Jodi Picoult. And by the way, I contacted that author, and the movie does not follow the book. So I would recommend reading the book and not watching the movie on that one. Okay. This goes with the handout. Okay. Any other questions before I begin? Okay. I don't know. I don't know what's going on here. It looks great on my screen. It's coming up here. It's on there, and I can email this to you. But basically, this is the core of social justice education is recognition that youth can become empowered at an academic level, a social level, at a political level, and at an emotional level. And once youth know that and feel like they are empowered, amazing things can happen. Because a lot of the ninth graders whose frontal lobe is not developed think the world revolves around themselves. And when they realize that the world doesn't owe them anything, they owe the world. amazing things can happen. I've been a teacher for 13 years. I have seen it, and I know. I don't know if this is happening. If somebody knows IT, they can help me out. Is that better?
That's smart.
Okay, am I able to go like this?
I'd have to use the computer.
Okay, no big deal. So these are the essential questions that I use, the big ideas that I use in my classroom. Your district, your school may ask you to come up with learning objectives. My learning objectives are my week-to-week things that have to do with science standards, the skills, and the content that goes hand in hand. But the big idea is I relate everything I do back to these questions to help also my ninth graders realize that decisions are being made for them on the daily that they have no say in. And the biggest thing that all of you can help me out with is the school lunch program. If that's how you have to get your kids involved with the community, start looking at your school lunch program and the USDA and how they say schools have to feed free lunch people because every school has them. And it's amazing the curriculum stuff that can come out of that because that really means something to them. Kids are always hungry, right? And some kids come to school just to eat. That's a sad reality, but it's true. And if they can start understanding why they have to come to school to eat, why does this program even have to exist, they're helping answer these questions and have a conversation. Okay, the microscopic stuff on your handout. The first thing, I can make this bigger, right? I'm doing the browser. Somebody help me?
Control plus.
Is that bigger?
Smaller.
Really? How about now? Right there? More?
That's good.
You sure?
Sure.
Okay. I talked about change making, and the pillars of my school have to do with starting empathy, teamwork, and problem solving, and how this book relates to that. So recognizing the problem, there's a zombie apocalypse. We need to know what's going on. The power went out at my school about 3 weeks ago. And some of my students were like, oh, we can go home, right? And some of the kids were like, why is the power out? What happened, right? So you have to go with that and find a happy medium of yes, there are certain laws that say you can go home after a certain time, there's no power at the school. But you need to address the root cause. Why is the power out? And as far as this, and it turned out to be a city block thing, it wasn't just a school. But the starting empathy, I immediately said, hello, do you understand how privileged your statement of the power's out, this sucks, we can't do anything is? I'm like, there are plenty of children around the world and schools that don't have the internet. They don't even know what it exists. And so starting at that point as an entry to start the conversation, just by the comments that are coming out of my class from situations. But the zombie autopsy definitely starts to feel sorry for these people. And there comes an ethical question of, because the UN says, if they're at this stage, you can kill them and you will not be charged with murder because they are no longer human. Would you kill your child or your parents? So it really gets deep into thinking about that. And some kids are hardcore cold, right? They would kill their parents now if it wasn't a crime. Teamwork. It's like Dr. Stevens said, it's 4 groups of scientists that are there. They sign up to go, and they know they're going to die, by the way. So it talks about like that medical ethics and that devotion to your job and love for humanity. Like, I'm going to be a part of something. Even if it doesn't finish it, I'm going to start it. And so these doctors come in and they do the work and they get infected and they eventually die. So the people going to this island, which really does exist for a geography lesson, by the way, to find out where the virus started and track it, know that they're going to die, but they are a great team. And it's interesting to find out there are different levels of infection. So that expression of the weakest link, you're only as strong as your weakest link, right? I'm a weak link right now at my school and in my classroom, right? And I need a lot of teamwork to get things done. I'm not embarrassed to say to you, how do I get this on the screen? I need help, right? The kids need to see that. It's okay. And they see it in the book because one of the doctors becomes very, very ill. And the other people have to rally around that. Problem solving, looking at what caused this virus, and Dr. Stephen alludes to something about hedge fund people coming up with this virus, talking about like recent, I don't know when it was released, that the CDC admitted that they, in the polio vaccine, put cancer genes or something like that. Like all like the controversy about vaccines, for example, can come out in this type of research. I don't know if you heard about that, did you? Like the CDC admitted to putting cancer in the polio vaccine. Sorry. Good to know? Sorry. Check sources. I would check sources. Everybody's going to Google it right now. What the hell? I got the polio vaccine. As far as cross-curricular, if you want to use this book, if you're allowed to, I don't know how your teams work, to have an anchor text, it's usually an English novel, right? English always gets the attention, no offense, to the novels that are chosen for if you're going to do something cross-curricular with somebody. Also, cross-curricular doesn't mean science with math anymore and English with history anymore. It means everybody. And this book addresses that. I'm able to talk about English through the vocabulary, the physiology and anatomy, and the use of simile, by the way, and metaphors that come out in his writing. Talking about first-person writing and diaries as a way of writing, also observational writing as a scientist, right? So the logging, everything that's happening that he's seeing. Social studies, obviously this is a social concept, looking at the organization of society. So who are these people that are picked to go to the island? Also, what is the government's role now that a third of humanity on the planet has died? So it's not just the U.S. that's involved. Looking at primary sources, as a diary is a primary source, and looking at the history of epidemics and pandemics, which can be done in science, but it can also be in social studies. And I use viruses are my go-to for this because in the science, which you'll see on the next slide, I divide viruses to bacteria because they need to see the difference. Art. There are medical illustrations in this book. It's recording observations and learning how to draw what you see. Graphic design can come out in it, also on the computer. So there's some computer scenes in there where people are drawing stuff on the computer, and there are kids who know how to do that, so they can make that connection. Math. pH is talked about in the book a lot. pH is a chemistry concept that's taught in NGSS, but it also is on the logarithmic scale. So you can look at logs and pH through this book. Also population dynamics and rate of change. Excuse me. SPED. I wanted you, oops, ooh. Oh, I can check that. That's neat. Okay, so SPED. This is a high interest text. It's also available in audio format. So I've had students who plug in and listen to it on Audible. And I have listened to it on Audible. And the guy who reads it, have you listened to it on Audible? Do you know him? You don't know him?
I got to speak with him before he did it because he wanted me to describe.
It's kind of eerie sounding.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a good voice actor. And the voices change in the audio version. So if a kid needs to hear those differences, that's helpful. I also there's a Spanish version available. So most of the ELLs in my community speak Spanish. There is a high refugee population in my community as well, but the book is not in Somali. I can find it in Spanish for them. And the audio, if they need the audio to read it in English, I help them with that. So there's no excuse, basically, if you want to use this book, right? Questions about that? This is the best part, because we're all science teachers, except for one. All right, so we're all English teachers, right? But we're not all science teachers. So if you use the zombie autopsies as an anchor text in the sciences, what I do is I read it in order, and the kids read it in order, and as the concepts come up is when we break away from the book and match them to the standards that I'm covering them. Sometimes things are out of order, and I'll really have to take, instead of one step away from what I'm doing, I take 2 steps away. But then I come right back to the novel and show them how it ties in. Also, it's a great opportunity to talk about life and death, so 9th graders are fascinated with that. It's a great opportunity because I was in pathology to incorporate that into my science content. But kids need to know about the difference between bacteria and viruses anyway. So this is a great book. It is a virus in the book. And to do that, do your bacteria cultures as far as like growing your bacteria, learning how bacteria reproduce, knowing how viruses reproduce. And then in the 10th grade, I'm able to do an STD lesson and then know what I'm talking about because of the viral bacteria thing. You can also do that in the 9th grade if your school allows you to. The drugs and alcohol. Yes?
Nicole, do you all read this aloud in class, or reading it at home?
Depends. No. So I have some kids who are high-level readers, and they want to check the book out or buy it. I've had kids say, "Can I buy it from you?" I'm like, "Yeah, you can buy it from me." Fast readers, right? I have kids who can't read, either because of an ELL issue. But for example, this year I have a 2nd grade primer in my 9th grade class. So I have to, and by the way, he did the best matrix project out of all of my students, which you will see the matrix in just a moment. Okay, so those expectations are still here. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Drugs and alcohol, kids are fascinated with drugs and alcohol. They have likely lost somebody to drugs and alcohol, or they've seen it on the news, or it's in the movies, or it's in the games that they're playing. And they need to know what it does to their brain. A lot of research and a lot of student voice comes in here because they're all interested in their own thing. A lot of my female students are very interested in what happens to babies. Very interested, and I think I should start graphing that data for my own use, like how many females in my room, or those who identify as a female, are looking at the congenital defects that can come from this stuff, right? The males, not so much. They're more into the trauma, the gunshot wounds, the concussions from football, okay? Definite career development. The characters are from all over the world, different genders, different biological sexes, different subject matters for their PhDs, right? But I was an autopsy tech, right? So it goes from that high-level education in PhD land all the way down to the person who does the gory. They get the gore, but you do the gory. So I digress, and they do dissection. They need to know how to do dissection. And in my class, we dissect eyeballs, hearts, and brains. And if I can get my hands on cats, which if any of you have tried to order cats, it's been impossible for 2 years. I don't know what's going on. Huh? Everybody wants some? Yeah, and they want to substitute rabbits. Have you come across that?
No, I don't teach the our anatomy class, but
Looks like.
my anatomy teacher is, I've been looking to.
Really? Well, because I have experience with fresh death, it's like, should I scrape that animal off the road and bring it to class? Like, it's gotten to that point. I know it's horrible, but I can handle it. All right, looking at trauma, disease, stroke, obviously, because I am having that, and the congenital defects, obviously, that come back from viruses and bacteria. The Zika virus was in the news in 2016 when I did this. Meningitis affects young people a lot. Also Ebola. So Ebola, the people who suffer from Ebola look a lot like the people who are in what movie? Anybody thinking of the movie? No.
You think it's 28 days later?
Dustin Hoffman.
Oh,
The hot zone.
No?
Outbreak.
Outbreak. They're bleeding from the eyes, right? And they have it's Ebola basically, and the cure is to spray the area. Huge social justice issue. Let's spray the area so that people don't get this virus. So the outbreak, obviously, looking at that movie and relating it to the novel for this type of work, if a student so chooses. Obviously, I do take a break and we do look at dissection, which my kids have gotten better over the years. My brain dissection this year was primo. I was like, wow, by my ninth graders. They even like laid it out like a professional pathologist. I had nothing to do with that. So giving praise for those dissections, eyeballs, they're able to tell me the parts of that. We talk about eyeballs because of where in the brain they go through and how that's affecting the zombie's vision, because there's a perceptive difference. A zombie lunges for its prey and misses a lot of the time. Why? So we dissect eyeballs. And we dissect hearts because one of the things that's key in this novel is that even though they're no longer human, they can watch their own autopsy. Yeah, so there's a scene in the book where they're doing an autopsy and the humanoid is like looking at his heart beating. Why is his heart beating? He's no longer human. So we're talking a lot of principles, scientific principles, anatomy, physiology. There's a huge thing about symbiotic relationships that you can do. You do have to teach that for the NGSS. So I do take a break from that and talk about parasitism, commensalism, mutualism, and then come back to it and say, okay, what is this virus? The teenage brain is so much fun for me as a science teacher and now as a mother of a teen. Oh, man, the teenage brain. Looking at the parts of the brain, what they do, structure, function, all that sort of stuff, which we do as science teachers anyway. But even getting down to neurons and neurotransmitters and talking about why your 14-year-old brain is different than your friend's 14-year-old brain. And that really has to do with the neurotransmitters and hormones that are going on. And if they can note that, they can understand themselves better. And then motivation. This is the fun part for teenagers, getting them motivated for school, getting them motivated to read a book, motivated to do anything in school. Where is that coming from? What does it? But then looking at the chemicals behind that and the part of the brain that triggers those things. So that even the intrinsic motivation to eat. We know when it's time to eat, right? We have extrinsic motivation. It's noon. It is time to eat. We go eat. Right? But we also have tummy growling or hangerness, right? And we know it's time to eat. So, these are different concept maps that I put together, and they are by no means fixed. Okay? They change yearly depending on who's in my classroom, the time frame that I'm allowed to do this in, etc. I have the last thing I just want to show you, I don't know what time it is, but this is the last thing, is the project matrix. And this is all these resources are available online, and I can also send them to you. I don't like code.
So the kids don't do a project?
Yes. So because I spend so much time on this, I've done it in a quarter, but I've also done it as a semester long thing. They have to do a project, and at my school, we showcase their work. So one of they showcase their work instead of sometimes taking a final exam, because it shows what they know and how they know it type thing. Let me just do this real quick. So, teacher talk right now, for those of you who know Bloom's taxonomy and Gardner's multiple intelligences theory. Okay, I learned this at the Differentiated Instruction Conference in Las Vegas, which by far has been my favorite conference ever. If you've never been to that, look it up. It's a chart, which I will bring up. I don't know what's going on. And I have multiple intelligence across the top, Bloom's taxonomy across the left, and 48 different projects. So the kids have to take an emotional intelligence test to find out what is their multiple intelligence, or I'm sorry, academic intelligence test. And in theory, they're supposed to do the projects that are in that line. Those are the projects that I wrote. It's editable. Editable. So it's online, it's in a Word format, and you can edit it according to your students and age level, by the way. They are theoretically supposed to do what's in line because it attacks all of Bloom's taxonomic levels, but it's in their intelligence. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. They are allowed to move around the matrix and they are allowed to offer a suggestion to me for a certain level of project. And I don't know what time it is, and I'm sure there's another session, but I can bring it up. I just need a second to put it on there. It's also on the might help if I spell matrix. Here it is. And I will make this bigger. This is a lot of student voice right here, because they get to really dive into their own brain to find out how their intelligence, their multiple intelligences are across the y-axis at the top, right? Oops. And then up and down, I'll highlight that so you can see it better, is the different levels of thinking and what they could do for that space. You can have the kids do all 48 projects, which I don't think is the right thing to do, because what I've done is, and when you look at it in detail, I've adjusted the project left to right, so the kids are doing the same outcome, but using that multiple intelligence for that level of thinking. And this is how I met Dr. Stephen. This square. Design a cure for NSTA, which is the virus. And my kid said, "We should let him know what we did." And I was like, "We should. Email him." And Caleb emailed him. I emailed him too, to expect the email. And that's how this relationship started. And my kids did present to him via Skype. And it was probably one of the most memorable experiences for them to present to the expert how they decided to cure the virus he had created in theory, using what they had learned in science. The neurotransmitters were super important because they were in the parts of the brain, and the symptoms that the zombies were experiencing to solve it. And from that, I actually had kids who said, while I was in the hospital, "I never thought about being a doctor, but maybe I could." And I was like, yes, maybe you can. Because we work as teams, we problem solve, you need evidence, and you can solve it. So I empowered my youth through this. I hope that you empower your youth through this. If you have any questions or need resources, I will send you what I have. And I have nothing else for today. If you have questions, I'm happy to stay and answer them. Thank you.